Howdy, I am Liliana Hildebrand, Industrial Engineering Sophomore at Texas A&M University and Content Director Intern at the Wisest Women. Welcome to the Wisest Girls After Party. Today, as we reflect on Black and Indigenous people of color in medicine, I have my wonderful coworker, Mikayla Benjamin, here to help us understand the issue. Mikayla, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Sure thing, Liliana. So my name is Mikayla Benjamin. I am a genetics sophomore major here at Texas A&M University. For me, I'm working on my genetics undergraduate degree because I have aspirations of becoming a genetic counselor. And for those of you who may not know what a genetic counselor is, there's a lot of different things that a genetic counselor can be, but basically it's someone who looks at the data taken in from a genetic test and they help explain that to people and walk them through the process of what their options are, different things that they can do to say if they have a genetic condition that's debilitating, what sort of things they can do to help mitigate the problems that would arise from that, or any sort of complications now that they know this information. And aside from being a genetics major and wanting to be a genetics counselor, I've been working on just sort of learning more about the field of medicine and all the sorts of ethics and stuff. So one of my favorite clubs that I'm in on campus is the A&M Bioethics Forum. It's a very lovely club. We meet on a bi-weekly schedule. We have a topic and we get to discuss different issues in medicine and the whole ethics behind that. It's really one of my favorite clubs here that I found.
Well, thank you again for joining us, Mikayla. Let's get into it. This past episode was called BIPOC and Healthcare, Be an Accomplice, Not an Ally, featuring Dr. Omolara Uwemedimo, founder of the Melanin Medicine podcast. Mikayla, what were your initial takeaways?
My initial takeaways were that I felt that I really resonated with Dr. Omolara. I resonated with the things that she fights for, many of the points she made about women in color in professional settings, especially the stereotype threat, because as much as it pains me, sometimes it feels that stereotype really has too much control over my life in a day-to-day basis.
I'm really sorry to hear that. I really enjoyed the episode as well. It gave me really different perspective than I had viewed medicine. I bet you hear this all the time. Anytime a white person learns about race issues, I felt very ignorant and convicted listening to the episode, and I wondered had I contributed to that to letting that stereotype affect people. And I was really excited to learn how we can be accomplices to all this. So thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. And you don't really. I appreciate that you feel bad, but it's okay because with my upbringing, I guess my parents sort of raised me in a very Americanized way, sort of detached from my African American roots. So a lot of this stuff, a lot of times things that are happening in the Black community, I'm very detached from that a lot of the time. So a lot of times I have to educate myself on these things, and I'm always growing like you are.
Okay. That does make me feel a little better, and I can kind of relate to that. I'm Hispanic, but I definitely don't look Hispanic. So when I hear some of my Wisest Women coworkers talk about the issues they've struggled with being Hispanic and being in the STEM field, I can't relate to any of that just because of how I look and also how I was raised. Dr. Miller and Dr. Chandra, the Wisest Women, start the episode by talking about the history and misuse of the term BIPOC, an acronym for a Black Indigenous Person of Color. I personally did not hear about this term until I was a college sophomore, and when I did, it was very misguided. I thought it included all minorities. When I was corrected, I felt pretty guilty for being uneducated about it. What is your experience with this term, and how has it impacted your view on race?
I think around the first time I heard this term was around the COVID-19 pandemic started, and also around when George Floyd was tragically murdered. If not then, I think I really started to hear it after my first semester in college. Because at the time, I wasn't really in the best of places, mostly because I didn't feel like I was connecting on campus, and I felt like I lacked a safe space. So during that period between the winter break we had between our fall and spring semesters, I would do a lot of looking up articles, such as being a POC on a PWI, which is to say a person of color on a primarily white institution like Texas A&M is. And, you know, just kind of other things in that vein when you feel that when you're a minority, because I'm from the Houston area like you are, and it's very diverse.
Oh, extremely.
It's so hard to feel sort of like, it's very hard to feel like you're a minority. I found for some reason, it just felt, it felt very different from it does here at A&M.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a bit of a shock for me that first semester once I came and felt isolated. But as I was reading a lot of those articles about all that sort of thing, I think that might have been another place where I first heard of BIPOC. So that also could have been it. Although now that I think about it, I've heard the term POC long before I've heard BIPOC. And personally, at least before today, that is, I've always appreciated POC because it's very short. It has a lot more brevity to it than BIPOC. But after hearing the talk from the Wisest Women, I see more about how POC has a history and it's attached to a certain group because of that history. And I also see how BIPOC does come off as a more inclusive term and is much nicer in that aspect. As for whether the term has impacted my worldviews, I'd say that it hasn't really impacted my view on race, but learning of the term has expanded my worldview, and it's made me more conscious and aware of the things that I say or how I might refer to others and how that might impact them based on the terms that I use.
That's interesting. Thank you for that input. Is really cool. Yeah, that. I do find that really cool. How like what you appreciated most about the term was how short it was and how simplistic it was. Yeah, good food for thought. Dr. Omolara Uwemedimo brings up a physician who, because of medical racism, was not given proper treatment and passed away due to other physicians not believing them, sending the physician home too early, and not giving patient necessary treatment. How does this make you feel, and how do you experience this type of medical racism yourself?
This makes me feel a lot of ways. Initially, I want to say I'm sad that someone wouldn't be believed by their doctor or physician for whatever reason about the pain that they feel in their body, and that would cost them their life. I think that's horrible and that's heartbreaking, and it hurts me, especially as someone who wants to have a future in the medical field. But at the same time, I also feel a sense of almost indifference, or I guess you could say I feel kind of jaded because I wouldn't expect anything less from American society, given its history and how humans are very capable of hurting each other as much as they're capable of helping each other. But then I also had this other emotion of anger once I hear about this. I'm just mad that this would ever happen, especially if it's because, like, if race is a factor and people are invalidating your pain because they think whatever reason your race makes you more resistant to pain, or it's not a big deal. They just don't believe you for whatever reason. And it makes me so very mad. Like, depending on the day, sometimes it'll be like just a little thing that bothers me in the back of my head. But it can also get extreme, as I could be furious or I could be absolutely livid if you were to tell me this, depending on the day and how deep of a dive I've been going into these topics. but just generally just hearing this gives me a lot of upset, negative emotions.
Yeah, thank you for being that vulnerable with us. That's definitely not right. And I felt really taken aback by just how deep it was and how a patient is literally telling you, yeah, you don't feel this pain because you're meant to feel this level of pain. That doesn't work. That's not how pain works. And it's, you should always assume the best of people, not assuming the best in a person because of their race or having tendencies to not believe the person's best because of the race is very wrong. So Dr. Uwemedimo also spoke about the medical racism. She also spoke about preparing her patients for the medical racism, between writing down what they're doing to you, at all times, write down, having a medical advocator, on standby or in your emergency contact so they know that you're getting the best care. I have absolutely never had to do this kind of preparation. Any preparation was oh, do I have my insurance information? Have you had to do this kind of preparation for a doctor's visit? And how has these types of things impacted how you see the medical field as a patient?
So I have not had to do this type of preparation, mostly because problems getting insurance and having to, get checkups on a regular basis and stuff like that. I haven't been keeping up with all the things that I should, no mammograms, no, the usual stuff that you get once you're an adult. And it's you can probably start to develop cancer, so let's do some preventative checkups and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't been able to have that privilege. It's kind of sad. So I can see why you would have this sit down and say, hey, these are the things that happen in a doctor's office. These are the things that you need to know to make sure that you get the care that you require. I can see why that would happen, but I personally have never been able to experience that in my family.
Okay. I'm really glad that you've never had to experience that, because hearing it on the podcast,
not necessarily the situation's still not a good situation, but
I'm it's terrible.
I haven't had to experience that either.
As your friend, I'm really happy you've never had to experience that, because that just sounds like a mental stress. It sounds so tiring to constantly watch your back.
It is.
And you have to do that twice as much as not only as a Black person, but you're a Black woman in STEM. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, in these areas where social justice is needed, I truly believe that there is something that the victim and the system can do. There is always a systematic responsibility for the issue, and then there is something that the victim can do to help it, whether that's learning new techniques. I mean, we've had women and Black women, or we've had women in STEM rise up to the tops. General Motors has a female CEO, which I think is super cool. So where do you place the responsibility on these social injustices? What specifically do you place on what responsibilities for the injustices do you place on the individual, and which of these injustices do you place on the system?
So for me, and a lot of things things that exist in society or team efforts that you have multiple people contributing stuff to, I feel like it's a team effort in that sort of sense, not because multiple parties are contributing to the system and multiple parties are involved in the system. So all of the parties have to come together and work together to sort of get this social justice done. So it's not just that we can blame the corporate side and say, it's your fault because of this capitalism, and you think that this is the more profitable thing. and you don't want to change because that will be costly and that will result in possibly what is it called? A loss in money and such. We can't just blame corporates. We have to also blame ourselves for being complacent with this a lot of the times, and not having the energy to stand up for ourselves and fight for these things that we should have. Like, it's terrible that a lot of times what happens in the medical field is like, it victimizes a lot of people. People get hurt. People could die. You become victims in that sense. But despite that, we still have to get up and we still have to fight for ourselves, because if you don't take the first steps at the very least, then who's going to? So I think that, I guess in a sense, you got to place responsibility on both the individual and the system to come forward and make change happen.
Okay. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So we've agreed that, the system is messed up and that the victims should try to fight against it or make it better. What do you think specifically, or can you think of any policies, functions of the system that makes it broken for BIPOCs, and how can we work to change them? Dr. Uwemedimo talks about that she's not accepting this system the way it is. She's not accepting it and she's trying to change it. How do you think we can do that?
While I don't know a lot of specifics about policy, because that's another source of stress for me, and I already stress enough as a college student, I would say probably a good place to start would be with education. There's a lot of very old and outdated information that's given to medical students, especially pertaining to race and such. Because I would like to say, on one hand, your race does impact the medical treatment that you have, but it's from like a social perspective. It's not like something that's biologically within you. It's like the way that society works and how they treat different groups of people affects the quality of care that they're given, in that sort of sense. So you should be aware of that, but we shouldn't be teaching people things like, someone is Black and they have a higher tolerance to pain, so you should be giving them less pain medicine. We should not be teaching false information like that to our medical students. That's an absolute no. So I think that it would take a lot of effort, but someone needs to go through all the different medical fields and all the different things that we're teaching our future medical professionals. And we need to look deep down inside and say, hey, is this rooted in racial bias, or is this rooted in truth? And if it's rooted in truth, then we keep it. But if it's rooted in racial bias, then it's got to go.
Mikayla, you are in a very in my opinion, an unfortunate spot here. You're the only Black person on our team, the University Honors Sophomore Advisors, and this is a team of mostly STEM majors who will absolutely try to be accomplices to the Black people in their jobs. How do you think our team and beyond can practice being accomplices now so we don't contribute to the system's problems? And what fears do you think would prevent us from doing so?
So I guess for this specific situation, or at least for me specifically, a lot of the things that I struggle with when grappling with my racial identity is whether or not the things that I think in my head are actually true. So it's like a lot of times I'll be walking around campus, or I'll just be going about my life, and I wonder, just something just happens. I can't really think of an example right now, but it's like after something happens, I think to myself, hey, did that just happen because someone was making an assumption based on race? And then, like you like to say, I like to try and see the good in people. And I like to think, nah, it was probably just for whatever other reason. It probably wasn't specifically directly tied to that. That wasn't malicious, Mikayla. It wasn't. And so I think that's good. Trying to see the best in people is good. But at the same time, I've been noticing that I'm also in a way invalidating the things that I think. And I'm almost falling into a trap of saying, oh, Mikayla, you silly old girl, you can't be possibly wrong. Gaslighting is what it is, I think.
Yeah.
A lot of times I feel like I gaslight myself into thinking that things that happen, like race isn't a factor. It's a beautiful world. Everything is fixed and there are no problems. So with that in mind, I think personally for the essay team or just people in general, it would be so helpful if listening is always helpful, but following up and from that listening and just not sort of saying, oh, you're right, Mikayla, that is nonsense. Because while on one hand, some things are nonsense, if you're like talking some extreme sort of, I think everyone's got it out for me. Everyone's trying to kill me or something. That's usually nonsense in a sense. If that makes any sense, tell me.
I think it does. I'm going to try to paraphrase it. So for college students in general to be accomplices to you specifically and to the Black population, you want us to listen. And when we're being told that someone feels like they've been racial injustice occurred and they've been profiled, or someone said a microaggression to them, you want us to critically listen and validate your feelings. Is that correct? Listen, not simply just to, put some thought into what you say, what you have your ears.
Yeah, not validate and not reaffirm the gaslighting. But at the same time, that's not to say that if I come to you and I say, Liliana, I think I experienced a microaggression, that you don't come and say, absolutely, Mikayla, it's time to start a revolution. Let's go and fight for your rights. And you make a huge scene about it. That while I do think there's still a lot of changes that need to be made in society, a lot of times, not everything needs to be made a viral post or blow up the internet. For me personally, a lot of time I'm just looking for a chance to rest and to recover sort of from when these incidents happen, so that I'm not always, in a sense, running or afraid or just stressed out because of who I am.
Mm-hmm. Well, if and when you choose to talk to me about that stuff, it's completely up to you. I won't push you for it. I will be sure to validate your feelings and to listen and to give you my full honest opinion.
Thank you for that. It means a lot.
And thank you so much for joining me today, Mikayla. Your words, per usual, are very wise, and I look forward to seeing you at our next sophomore advisor meeting. And thank you, WiseNet, for listening to this wonderful WISE after party. Be sure to donate to our fundraiser. Mikayla, before you go, where can we find you?
I'm over at LinkedIn right now. Mikayla Benjamin. There's probably a lot of Mikayla Benjamins, although I'm sure Liliana can get the exact link up to my LinkedIn profile. But I've been having a couple moments of trying to figure out how I want to exist in the virtual world. So I don't have much stuff out there besides my LinkedIn.
Well, LinkedIn's great. I would highly recommend looking at it because A&M's cool, Gen X is cool. Love that. Once again, thank you, WiseNet, for joining us to another Wisest Girls After Party. Be on the lookout for our next episode. Make sure to like and subscribe to Wisecast where you can podcast.